I came home from 6 months at sea to find another family's laundry drying on my back porch, a child's bicycle chained to my own railing, and a small laminated sign taped to my front door that read, "Managed by Coastal Crown. All tenant inquiries, this number." I stood in my own driveway in Palmetto Landing with my sea bag on my shoulder and read that sign 4 times. And the strangest thing happened. I didn't get angry. I got quiet. The specific quiet of a man who used to practice real estate law for a living, reading a document that has just told him a crime has been committed against him and beginning, automatically, the way you never lose it, to build the case. My name is Owen Cuddy. I'm 49, and for the last 12 years I've been a chief engineer in the Merchant Marine, which means I disappear for 6 months at a stretch into the engine room of a container ship where the phone doesn't work and the world goes on without me. Before the sea, though, I spent 10 years as a real estate attorney in Charleston, until the billable hours and the fluorescent lights hollowed me out, and I ran away to the one place nobody could email me. I never told anyone in the neighborhood about the law. They saw a quiet man who was always gone. That turned out to be the most useful thing about me, though not in a way anyone intended. I bought the house on Heron Walk 3 years ago, specifically because it had a separate guest cottage, a little carriage house over the garage, its own door, its own porch, and because the lot backed onto the salt marsh, and because a man who spends half his life listening to a diesel engine the size of a house wants, on his months ashore, to hear nothing but the tide. I paid cash from a decade of hazard pay. I set the mortgage on the small remaining note to auto-pay. I set the HOA dues to auto-pay. I am by disposition and by training a man who leaves a paper trail on everything, because 10 years of litigation teaches you that the paper is the only thing that doesn't change its story while you're not looking. I want you to hold on to that because it's the whole spine of what happened. I was gone for 6 months, out of contact, with a house that sat dark and quiet and paid for. And to a certain kind of person, a dark, quiet, paid-for house that its owner can't check on for half a year is not a home. It's an asset that isn't being monetized. Bridget Talmadge was that kind of person. She was the president of the Palmetto Landing HOA, 50, a short-term rental realtor with a voice like sweet tea and the relentless underlying hum of someone always calculating occupancy. The last time I'd seen her, the week before I shipped out, she'd stopped me at the mailboxes and asked, warmly, how long I'd be gone this time, and whether the darling little guest cottage ever sat empty, and I'd told her 6 months, and cottages always empty, and thought nothing of it. I thought she was being neighborly. She was taking inventory. So, the laundry, the bicycle, the sign. The door of my guest cottage opened while I was still standing there, and a man came out, early 30s, wary, a dish towel still in his hand, a little girl peering around his legs. This was Luis Navarro, though I didn't know his name yet. He looked at me and my sea bag and the fact that I was standing on what he believed was his rented property, and his face did something complicated and frightened. "Can I help you?" "I think you might be living in my house," I said as gently as I could manage, because the little girl was watching. "I own this property. I've been at sea." "Who told you that you could rent this?" "We rent it legally," he said, and there was a tremor under the defiance. "From the management company, Coastal Crown. We have a lease. We paid a deposit and 3 months up front." He said it the way you say a thing you're suddenly terrified isn't true. Now, I could have made that moment ugly. A lot of men would have. But 10 years of law had taught me the single most important reflex a person can have in a crisis, which is, get the document. Don't argue with the person. Read the paper. "Can I see the lease?" I asked. "I'm not angry at you. I don't think you did anything wrong. But I think we've both been robbed, and I'd like to see the lease." He brought it out, and I read it standing in my own driveway, and it was beautiful in the way that a clean autopsy is beautiful. A residential lease for my address. My exact address. Heron Walk, Unit Guest Cottage, signed by Coastal Crown Management as agent for Palmetto Landing HOA, collecting a $2,000 deposit and $1,800 a month, first and last and a month besides. The Navarros had paid $7,400 in good faith to rent a house from people who did not own it, had no right to lease it, and had simply decided that my absence was a business opportunity. I drove to the HOA office, which is a converted cottage by the community dock, and Bridget Talmadge lit up like I was a returning hero. "Owen, you're back!" As if this were wonderful, as if I'd come home to a welcome. "We were so worried. The house just sat there, month after month, dues unpaid, nobody answering. We honestly thought you'd walked away from it." So the board did the responsible thing and placed it into management to protect the community's investment and recover the arrears. "You'll be pleased to know it's been generating income against your balance." I let her finish. "I've learned that a person defending a crime will, if you let them talk, hand you the entire indictment. My dues," I said, "are on auto-pay. My mortgage is on auto-pay. Both have drafted every month I've been gone. I don't have arrears. There is no balance. Just a flicker. There and gone. Well, our records show—" "I'd like to see the records, and I'd like to see the court order." The court order," I said pleasantly, "authorizing the association to take possession of a member's home and lease it to a third party. Because that requires a judgment and a foreclosure and a writ, none of which I was served with, and none of which appears in the county records, which I checked on my phone in your parking lot 10 minutes ago. So, I'd like to see the order." The sweet tea went out of her voice by about 2 degrees, which for Bridget Talmadge was the equivalent of another woman throwing a chair. "Owen, there's no need to be adversarial. We acted in good faith to protect a neglected property. If there's been a paperwork mix-up, I'm sure Coastal Crown can sort it out." A paperwork mix-up. They had rented out my house and pocketed the money, and she called it a paperwork mix-up, and smiled. And I understood 2 things at once. The first was that this was not an accident. The second was that Bridget Talmadge had never once, in her life, been in a room with someone who knew exactly what she'd done and exactly what it was called. What it was called, for the record, is conversion, and unlawful possession, and fraud. It is not an HOA dispute. It is theft with letterhead. I went home, to my own house, where I could not sleep in my own guest cottage because a frightened family was in it. And I did the thing I am actually good at, the thing the sea had let me forget I was good at. I built the file. I pulled my sea service record, which proved I hadn't abandoned anything. I'd been aboard the Wando Reach on a documented contract, earning a wage, a working man at his job, not a deadbeat who'd walked away from a house. I pulled 6 months of bank statements, showing the dues and the mortgage drafting like clockwork every single month, which meant the arrears were invented. I pulled the county records, showing no lien enforcement, no foreclosure, no writ of possession. Nothing that would give anyone the right to so much as unlock my door. And I had the Navarros' lease on my address, signed by Coastal Crown as agent for an HOA that has no more right to lease my home than it has to lease the moon. Then I went and knocked on my own guest cottage door, and I asked Luis and Maria Navarro if I could come in and talk, and I told them the truth, that they had been robbed exactly as I had, that the money they'd paid, their savings, Maria told me quietly, everything they'd saved since coming to Charleston, with Sophia about to start 2nd grade at the elementary down the road, had gone to a company that had no right to take it. Maria put her hand over her mouth. Luis sat down slowly at my kitchen table, in my house, and said, "We looked at the website. It looked so real. There were photos. There was a lease." "It looked real because they do this a lot," I said, though I didn't yet know how much I was about to be right. And here is the fork in the road where this story either becomes ugly or becomes something else, and I want to be honest that I stood at it. As a lawyer, I knew a thing the Navarros didn't. Their lease was void. They had no legal tenancy, and in South Carolina, I could probably have them out in a matter of weeks because you cannot lease what the lessor doesn't own. The fast, clean, selfish move was to treat them as trespassers and take my house back. But they hadn't done anything except believe a professional-looking website and hand their savings to a thief. They were the second victims, not the first villains. And there was a little girl about to start second grade. So I made a different decision, the one that cost me more, and turned out to be the one that won. I told the Navarros, "Don't pay Coastal Crown another cent. Don't move, and be my witnesses. We're going to burn this thing down together." The next morning, Hadley Boone came across the street with a spiral notebook. Hadley was 72, widowed, and possessed of the single greatest asset in any neighborhood war. Nothing to do all day, and a window that faces the street. She had, it turned out, been keeping a log for years, a genuine, dated, handwritten log of every car, every move-in, every stranger with a suitcase in Palmetto Landing. "I don't sleep much," she said, setting it on my table like evidence, which it was. "And I noticed things. Your cottage, honey. They were showing it to people in your second month gone. And it's not just you." She turned to a page. "The Paytons, over on Osprey. Army family. He was deployed, Kuwait, I think, and that whole spring there were renters in their house. When Mrs. Payton came back, she was in tears at the mailbox. Then they paid something and it all went quiet, and they moved out within the year. Never said a word about it." She looked at me. "I always thought that was strange, paying to get quiet about your own house." That was the moment the whole thing changed shape for me. Because the Paytons meant it wasn't a paperwork mix-up, and it wasn't even really about me. It was a business model, and a business model has records. I hired local counsel. You always want a member of the local bar to actually stand up in the room, even when you know the law yourself. A sharp real estate and landlord-tenant attorney named Taryn Voss, who read my file, set it down and said, "Owen, this isn't a covenant dispute. This is conversion, unlawful ouster in reverse, and fraud. And if this management company is doing it as a practice, it's an organized fraud scheme. The lovely part, for us, is that your absence is documented. Your payments are documented, and their lack of any legal authority is documented by its total absence from the county records. You didn't leave them a defense." She tapped the Navarro's lease. "And these people are your best witnesses, because they paid real money. Juries hate a thief who robs a family with a kid." Then the last piece walked in, because these things, when they turn all at once. A man named Dave Mercer called me, a former property manager for Coastal Crown who'd been let go, he said, for asking too many questions about the dormant list. He was angry, and he was scared, and he had copies. And what Dave Mercer had copies of was an internal Coastal Crown playbook, an actual written procedure titled, I am not making this up, Dormant Asset Onboarding. It laid out, in bloodless corporate bullet points, how to identify homes whose owners were reliably absent, deployed military, merchant sailors, long-haul truckers, expats, snowbirds, how to paper a file showing neglect and unresponsive owner and manufactured arrears, and how to place the property into management and lease it, recovering costs against the owner balance. There was a spreadsheet. There is always a spreadsheet. A column labeled Absence Window. My house was on it. Absence window. 6 months, semi-annual. The Paytons were on it. So were 9 other homes across 3 subdivisions that Coastal managed. They had industrialized the theft of empty houses. Discovery, when Taryn pried it open, showed the money. And the money is where Bridget Talmadge stopped being a president and became a defendant. The rents from these dormant homes flowed to Coastal Crown, and a cut of them flowed onward to an LLC, and the LLC was Bridget's. She wasn't a well-meaning board president who'd trusted a bad vendor. She was a partner in the scheme. Her whole short-term rental realtor act was the front. The real business was renting out her neighbors' homes while they were at war or at sea and splitting the take. The dues she claimed I owed had been invented in the same file that leased my cottage to the Navarros. When Coastal Crown and Bridget realized I was a lawyer, that the quiet sailor they'd filed under 6-month absence window could read their playbook better than they could, they did not fold. They got vicious, and they got clever, and they aimed it exactly where it would hurt worst. They leaned on the Navarros. A coastal rep told Luis, privately, that if they cooperated with me they'd lose everything, their deposit, their home, and any chance of getting their money back. But if they moved out quietly and stayed quiet, Coastal would make the deposit right. Pay for silence, exactly like the Paytons. And they seeded the neighborhood group chat with a news story that Owen Cuddy, the cold, absentee landlord, was throwing a hard-working family with a little girl out onto the street over a technicality. Overnight, I went from robbery victim to the villain evicting Sofia Navarro before 2nd grade. It was, I'll admit, a good move. It nearly worked. It turned my own righteous anger into a liability, because every time I asserted my ownership, it looked like I was menacing a child. Bridget caught me at the dock one evening, alone, no witnesses she could see, and let the mask slip for exactly 1 sentence, smiling the whole time for anyone watching from a porch. "You'll be back at sea by fall, Owen. You always are. You can file all the paper you want. We'll just wait you out. We're very patient." She genuinely believed that. Her entire scheme was built on the certainty that absent men stay absent, that a sailor sues for a week, and then the horizon calls and he's gone, and the house goes quiet again, and the meter starts running. She had built a business on the mathematical near certainty that men like me leave. She had never met a man who was tired of leaving. Because here's the thing she got wrong, the human variable that isn't in any spreadsheet. I had a ship waiting. A berth on the Wando Reach, another 6-month run. The money I'd built my whole life around. And for the first time in 12 years, I turned it down. I called the company and I took a leave. And I stood on the beach and let the horizon call, and I did not go. Because I finally understood that if I got on that ship, I would lose. Not just my house, but the Navarro's savings, and the Payton silence would become my silence, and Bridget Talmadge would be proven right about absent men forever. Staying was the whole case. Staying was the thing the entire scheme was built to assume I'd never do. The reckoning came at the Palmetto Landing annual members meeting, in the clubhouse by the dock, because Taryn and I chose to do it there, in front of the neighbors who'd been told I was evicting a child, and in front of the district attorney's white-collar investigator who came as my guest. I did what I do. I built it in front of them, piece by piece, the way you lay out a case for a jury who's already been told you're the bad guy. My sea service record, a working man at his job, not an abandoner. My bank statements, every payment made, no arrears, the debt, a fiction. The county records, no judgment, no foreclosure, no writ, no legal authority of any kind. The Navarro's lease, my address, their $7,400, signed by a company that owned nothing. Hadley's log, the Paytons, and then Dave Mercer's playbook, dormant asset onboarding, projected 10 feet tall on the clubhouse wall, with its absence window column and my name in it, and the money trail Taryn had traced from those rents into Bridget Talmadge's private LLC. And then I did the thing that broke her narrative in half. I put Luis and Maria Navarro up, and instead of casting them as squatters, I stood beside them and told the room they had been robbed, exactly as I had, that they had paid their life savings in good faith, and that I was not asking the association to remove them. I was demanding that Coastal Crown return their money too. The cold, absentee landlord evicting a child turned out to be the man standing between that child's family and the thieves. There was no version of the story left for Bridget to tell. In her deposition, she did not say she couldn't recall. She sat up straight and said she had protected neglected assets for the good of the community, that homes left to rot hurt everyone's values, that she had brought responsible stewardship to properties their owners had clearly walked away from. She defended renting out a deployed soldier's house as a public service. It was the truest thing she ever said. She really did believe that an empty house was a moral failing that entitled her to it. Here is how it landed. The court confirmed what was never actually in doubt once someone made them look. I own my house. I owed nothing. And every lease Coastal Crown signed on my property was void. They were ordered to disgorge every dollar of rent they'd collected on it. To me. The Navarros got their $7,400 back and their deposit, clawed straight out of Coastal Crown. And the dormant asset onboarding playbook, the spreadsheet, and the money trail into Bridget's LLC turned a civil case into a criminal one. Because the leases and the payments and the fake notices had crossed state lines through the mail and the wires, it went federal. Bridget Talmadge was convicted of organized fraud and of embezzling through her LLC from the very association she led. She got real time. Years, not a fine. Lost the realtor's license that had been her whole identity and was barred for life from any community board. The principals of Coastal Crown went to prison on the fraud scheme. Its dormant property program was unwound across all 3 subdivisions, and the other 9 families on that spreadsheet, the Paytons among them, were found and made whole. Mrs. Payton, I heard later, cried again at that mailbox, for a different reason. I did not evict the Navarros. That was the move everyone expected, and it was never going to happen. Instead, I did the thing that felt, after all of it, like the only decent ending available. I offered to lease them the guest cottage. Legally, honestly, at a fair rent, from the man who actually owns it. They needed a home, and Sophia was already in the school down the road. I needed someone to watch the house when I'm at sea. And I had just been reminded, expensively, what happens to a house nobody's watching. Out of 2 people the thieves had robbed, we made one honest lease. Palmetto Landing fired Coastal Crown and rewrote its rules so that no property can ever be placed into management without a court order and verified proof of ownership. The dormant property list was destroyed. Hadley Boone was, at her own insistence, made the volunteer keeper of the neighborhood's records, a job she was born for. As for the sea, I still go, but I take the shorter runs now, the coastal hauls, 3 and 4 weeks instead of 6 months, because I found out the hard way what my long absences were worth to the wrong people, and because, for the first time in 12 years, I have a reason to want to be back sooner. It's evening as I write this. I'm shipping out on a short one tomorrow, up to Norfolk and back. And for the first time in 12 years, I'm leaving a house that isn't dark and empty and waiting to be somebody's asset. The lights are on in the guest cottage. Luis is grilling. Maria taped a note to my front door where that laminated Coastal Crown sign used to be, handwritten in careful English she's proud of. We'll watch the house. Come home safe. And Sophia yelled across the yard, in the specific outrage of a 7-year-old, that I had better bring her back a seashell from Virginia. I used to leave a house. Tomorrow, for the first time, I'm leaving a home. And I already know I'm coming back to it. Here's what makes this one so quietly modern. Bridget Talmadge didn't forge a deed or send men with bats. She monetized an empty house, which is a colder and more bloodless kind of theft, and one that's spreading. The scheme ran on a simple, ugly insight. A house whose owner is reliably gone, deployed, at sea, overseas, isn't a home to a certain kind of predator. It's a dormant asset. And the genius of it, the part that should chill you, is the paperwork. They didn't break in. They manufactured abandonment and arrears and wrapped the theft in a management agreement and a professional website so that the second victims, the Navarros, paying their life savings for a lease, were the ones who made it look legitimate. Notice how Owen beat it, because it's the whole lesson. Not with the fists, and at first not even with a lawyer, with a paper trail he'd left out of pure habit. Auto-pay statements proving the debt was invented. A sea service record proving he hadn't abandoned anything. County records proving they had no legal authority by their total absence. When you keep the receipts on your own life, you make yourself very hard to erase from it. His profession was the twist, but the habit was the weapon. The legal spine is worth carrying with you. An HOA cannot take possession of your home and rent it out, not for unpaid dues, not for anything, without a court judgment, a foreclosure, and a writ. A management agreement is not a court order. A lien is not ownership, and the moment they collect rent on a home they don't own, it stops being a covenants dispute and becomes conversion and fraud. And done as a business, across many absent owners, it becomes the kind of federal case that ends in prison. If a company is ever collecting money on your property without a judge's signature, that's not management. That's theft with letterhead. So here's the question I'll leave you with. Your home, when you're not there, deployed, traveling, at sea, or just away for a long season, who's watching it, and could they prove it isn't yours? The people who do this are betting on your absence and your silence. Owen won for one reason. He refused to be absent one more time, and he refused to let a robbed family be turned into his enemy. The scheme assumed that men who leave always leave again. The one thing it couldn't survive was a man who finally decided to stay.